Okay. Stream is coming through. Okay. Twitch is going through. Instagram is going through. YouTube is going through. Looks like Facebook's having a problem. We will try them later. All right. So, welcome. My name is JD. I'm with the Cosmopolitan Coalition of United Earth, and this is a conversation with Professor Cameron Harwick with SUNY Brockport. We'll be discussing free trade and global conflicts, and we'll be talking current events as well as theoretical future ones. So without further ado, let's do a mic check. Professor, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. All right. So if you're on TikTok, you are not seeing all of us, but I think, apologies, let me turn that off. And I don't think we have you yet, Professor. Bear with us one moment. See, one day when there's like enough volunteers, if you'd like to volunteer, you can go to cosmopolitancoalition.org/engage so that we can have this set up. Right now it's just us. So give me 1 second here. There we go. I think I got you. I'm going to pop this chat out. And just like it to happen.
Not working?
It is not working. For some reason, I'm not being able to get you on here. Bear with me 1 more second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove it and re-add it.
Sure.
What I was doing was testing it last night, and this is the first time that I actually tried a video in the other direction, and I was using my phone, and I think there might have been a difference there. There we go. Select window. There you are. All right. Awesome. I'm going to say OK. And transform. Fit to screen. And move you up there. And what I'll do is I'll move this to full screen. There we go. All right.
Hello.
Hello. All right. So one more step is if anyone joins the Discord, we will go ahead and open up for questions later. But for now, let us begin. So I have some questions here. All right. Thank you for everyone who joined early. Looks like, oh, wow, we have a good number of people showing up. Thank you, everyone. Again, if you're on TikTok, it looks like we have a lot of traffic there. We are having the conversation in a live stream. So if you'd like to see the visuals for now, you can go find us on some of the other apps. But once we get this worked out with TikTok where we can connect it, you'll be able to hear everything. If you have issues hearing the person behind in my ears, let me know. But I am here and checking the chats. So, Professor, a while ago, I asked you a question about a current event, and it was after the tariffs the Liberation Day, I think it was what it was called. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effed are we? And I think you rated us at an 8. But before we get into this conversation, do you still hold us at an 8? Or would you say that based on recent events, it's changed?
I think 8 conditional on everything going through as planned, which
Okay.
a lot of it has not yet, and it's unclear how much of it was ever going to. But one is still holding out hope that it won't be as bad as we're all fearing.
Okay.
And I think markets are also not as down as they initially were on the hope that it won't be that bad. So we'll see.
Okay. So not tomorrow, but there may be another day we get to see this problem through. So let's talk about free trade generally then, because right now we seem to have an ideological difference, right? Because you come at this from an economic perspective of, and I'm going to grossly oversimplify, but basically make line go up, right? Because what that line represents is effectively the growth, the prosperity, the economic outcomes, right? Is that a fair statement?
I would want to be a little more specific about what the line is, but
describe the line.
Conditional on that.
Okay, yeah, I'd actually love your description of the line, just to set like an understanding.
Say that again.
I'd like to get your definition of the line so that we have an understanding of like what you think the end goal should be, just so we can establish a frame of reference for this conversation, where our values are.
Yeah, so I'm coming at this from a perspective that starts with what is GDP? And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what GDP is or is supposed to be like. What is the gold standard for what GDP is supposed to tell us? Because a lot of people start with how do we collect data on GDP and just stop there. But there's actually a guiding light about what we wanted to show, right? GDP, at least in real terms, GDP is supposed to tell us something about the value added in the economy. And what is value? Value is the satisfaction of human wants and needs. And so to say economic growth is good, growth in GDP is good, as if that's some kind of value that we want to trade off against other values, I think that's a complete misunderstanding of what GDP is, because GDP represents the satisfaction of any kind of value that I might hold and that you might hold. Now, of course, GDP misses a lot of things, right? GDP misses a lot of quality change. When technology gets better, GDP misses a lot of externalities. People critique the way it handles environmental disruption, for example. Which, fair enough, these are legitimate critiques of GDP as collected today, but they are not critiques of economic growth, right? What they are a critique of is the way we measure economic growth.
Okay, I see where you're. Full disclosure to anyone joining, we do know each other from way back, but we find ourselves, I've found ourselves on opposite positions of many topic discussions. And I will say that I am finding myself understanding, I think, what you're laying down. What you're effectively saying is you think the critique as described, the critique of the economic system as described isn't really a critique of the idea of growth, but of the systems that currently are used to measure it, or even the denominations we necessarily use and how we value those currencies or structures or social credits or financial instruments. Yeah. Okay. So the king, I guess if we were to try and marry this, it would sort of be like the kingdom of ends. The kingdom of ends is flawed, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't opt to be a universal legislator. Right, because
if you could perfectly do that, I guess there's a distinction between is it a bad goal or are we bad at accomplishing the goal?
Well, I think that actually I have this later, and I have no problem with bouncing around these list of topics that I have here to go through. But I think that is one of the valid questions here this evening, and with life generally. It's what happens if the political interests don't, as reflected in the outcomes of their election systems or I shall say selection systems, whatever they happen to be. How does that reflect on the economic decision makers, right? Because there's going to be a tension there. I suspect, just looking around me in the world, that there might be a tension between the political interests as reflected and the economic interests as may be considered optimal per some economic theory, right? Like that. And then the question is, how do we address that? Because at some level, someone is going to need to be a decider. And
so if we think of politics and markets as alternative decision-making procedures, and you've done a lot of work with how do we think about aggregating preferences in the political realm? How do we pull everybody's preferences and put that together into a meaningful and legitimate, let's say, head of state, for example, if we're voting on a head of state? If we have a legislature, how do we aggregate everybody's preferences into a meaningful government policy program? And I think the economy is solving a very similar problem in principle, just in a very different way, in the sense of how do we aggregate people's preferences over the wants and needs that I want to satisfy, the consumer goods that I want to purchase, the goals that I want to pursue, not just consumer goods, but the broad life goals that I want to pursue. And how do we aggregate all the life goals that people have into a structure of production? What does the economy actually produce such that as many people as possible can be facilitated in the life goals that they have? And it's a much more decentralized process than the political system. And so the actual nuts and bolts are very different, but fundamentally both of them are about how we take a bunch of people and make decisions together.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're laying down, and a good friend of mine says if you cannot put your opponent's argument in terms that they themselves would agree with, you do not understand your opponent's argument, nor do you potentially understand your own. So if I may hash that part. So what you're effectively saying is the political will and the economic will is effectively the same expression, but the difference is one is an expression of selectors for the makings of policy, and the other is how you spend or invest your instruments, whatever they may be. And then the outcomes that occur market-wise as a result of those investments would reflect the consequences of those decisions that were made, just like the actual decisions those electors make are the consequences of your original selection decisions. Is that a fair statement?
I'm always a little wary of thinking about will in either politics or economics, because there is no, the government does X, Y, Z. Well, the government is people, right? And there's some process that generates an outcome from the people in it, and same with the economy, right? So I think I would mostly agree, except just that there's no such thing as a will outside of the process that we use to aggregate these preferences.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Right. And I think this is actually, while we're kind of getting a little off to the path from this conversation, or the topic of this conversation, but I'm happy to go there. I agree with you, because if I may try to get inside that head, I think your wariness comes from the fact that just the idea that you have someone else with a control mechanism who isn't the person who's the actual pursuer of that interest is, you do not like the idea that you can say, well, this person has the will of that other person. Is that a good way to put it?
And that raises kind of the representation problem, but I think it's a deeper ontological problem, in the sense that, in what sense do we think of there being an aggregate will, or as Rousseau would say, a general will, right? Is there something that is there something out there that we're trying to uncover? Or is it something that any process is going to just generate different patterns of ways we use resources?
Well, I mean, I believe our economic activity will always be the latter.
Mhm.
Ultimately, what you choose to spend your dollar on and what you choose to, like, those are your decisions. Now, we can talk about the actual real purchasing power of that, where someone will say, yeah, I want to spend my dollar in this way, or not, but I can't because some political policy is in the way.
Right.
And this extends from everything, from labor decisions in a domestic market to trade in a foreign market. I actually ran into this situation. I have a in-law that lives in Pakistan, and they work for. They get paid in rupees. But they always convert to dollars. And they found that even though they're getting raises in rupees, because of the price index of the way the exchange rate works, whenever they take those raises and then convert them, the dollar has always compensated for it. And so therefore it's reflected in the fact that the numbers keep coming out. 15,000 one year is still 15,000 the next year, is still 15,000 the next year, within a few dollars relative to the rupees. In that same conversation, they talked about how there was someone in Pakistan who was trying to get their visa in America because they wanted to send dollars back to Pakistan. And until both of those conversations occurred back to back, I didn't contemplate. Once that happened, I should say, it dawned on me. It's like, in order for you to keep up with the global inflation, then you must ultimately have the ability to acquire a currency via your labors that you can't otherwise acquire in Pakistan. The global default currency that actually is pegging everyone's else currency, because in order to get from one currency to another, you have to go through the dollar. In order to actually earn that and invest that, you have to be in a place that has jobs that pay in dollars. And so as long as you live in an area, you will be affected by that policy. I thought that was an interesting, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button here with the microphone. But yeah, I mean, if Pakistan has higher inflation, then what is that? That's a tax on people who hold money in rupees.
Right.
And yeah, the more you can get out of that to a lower inflation currency, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. And so thereby, in a very strange sense, the same pressure that attracts immigration is the very same pressure that by which the consumer economy operates, because that pressure makes it the default buying currency, the default global trading currency. If we don't have that standing, then in a very interesting sense, then while we will not economically prosper from it, and we'll get into that, it would actually reduce that immigration pressure because there wouldn't be an economic advantage anymore. With that, unless you had a point you wanted to make on that, I was actually going to move on to free trade generally.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Efficiency via comparative advantage, expanding consumer choice and innovation. So we have seen this raising of the bar in terms of technological and socioeconomic standards of living relative to our past selves. I don't think there's very few areas on this planet at this point in the year 2025 that are not significantly developed relative to where they were in 1925. Right, it's just we are on a different planet. In fact, we are literally on a different planet. We have 2 nuclear-powered SUVs on Mars right now. We are clearly different. And I don't think it would be a stretch to say a lot of individuals in economic circles have said that the global trade that we have enjoyed and the advances from the technology that we have used to acquire that trade and then make that trade more efficient has led to that. Can you explain why that would be? Like, what is the actual fundamental underlying here? Like, why is protectionism inferior to trade generally?
Yeah, so trade is something, and specifically free international trade, is something that every economist who's not named Peter Navarro believes in. And the logic here is just so strong for multiple reasons, comparative advantage being one, but there's a lot other reasons in addition to that. The comparative advantage reason basically is it's always possible for you and me to specialize and trade, and that will make us better off than if we just did everything ourselves. There are going to be just very, very few, almost zero circumstances where it would be impossible for us to become better off by specializing in trade. We would have to be exactly the same person for that to be impossible.
Are you saying, when you're saying specializing in trade, you mean that you're processing all your stuff domestically?
Right. Yeah. So everything that I say between you and me as people, right? If we're trapped on an island and we want to, I'll grow food and you can hunt boars or something, right? Everything we say about that, it generalizes between countries too, right? It would be better for countries to specialize according to some kind of comparative advantage and then trade for the things they need. And that makes both countries better off than if they just tried to do everything themselves. Now, there are some, of course, non-economic caveats like national security. That's a legitimate non-economic caveat to that point. But as far as the value of trade, and I think you're exactly right to connect the just astounding and unprecedented throughout history economic growth of the past even 100 years, right? I mean, the Industrial Revolution was 300 years ago, but the past 100 has been the most eventful in human history. And they say, nothing new happens under the sun. Something new has happened under the sun, right?
Oh, yeah.
And trade, you're exactly right. The trade is a big part of that because
the fact that this conversation is occurring and people are listening to us now is a marvel beyond, like, I am not in the 1% or anywhere close. The fact that this technological, I have access to this is amazing. Hi, everyone. Speaking of which, just want to recap. This is a conversation about free trade and global conflict with Cosmopolitan Coalition of United Earth. Thank you for everyone who's joining. We'll be taking a break to review comments and then respond once I can actually merge TikTok and the rest in about 10 minutes, but I just wanted to check in. So yeah, carry on. You were talking about the value of the free trade and the technological advantages and everything that's allowed us to get here. And it can be attributed to that because we couldn't make, like, this stuff that I have here, the literal, and correct me if I'm wrong, the literal raw materials in aggregate, all the little components just don't exist here. And the amount of effort it would take to build the things to even get close to that is above and beyond. Like, it would set us back how far, like, realistically, if massive protectionism really did kick in, like Iron Curtain type stuff, where would we find ourselves?
We would experience just an enormous regress, economically speaking. Like, we would not be able to probably enjoy, certainly this sort of thing. Right? I mean, you talked about some of the things don't even exist here, right? Supply chains are so globalized, and a big part of why trade is connected with economic growth is because the bigger the market you can sell to, the more you can specialize. And so globalization makes it possible to locate finer and finer things with smaller and smaller profit margins, but with scale, right? And so we're finding new and bigger and bigger ways to create value for people. And again, value is value to people, right? We are making people's actual lives better off by facilitating their accomplishing their own goals. And like you said, I mean, 1%, 0.01%, 30 years ago, nobody could do what we're doing today.
Yeah, precisely. So part of the issue there may be, I suspect, that I was born, for all intents and purposes, I'm a child of the internet. I've had access to the internet since the late 90s. And I was born in the late 80s. So from my perspective, the non-connected world is a dream. But because it seems so common to me, and now at this point, like my children, like they're the iPad generation, right? And they're about grown up. They are so connected to it, and the world, as we understand it, seems like it's been here forever, but it has not. Not like it is. If it is such a blip on the radar that if time were reversed and we were to literally technologically find ourselves in the medieval era, somewhere in there, right? But we knew that 500, 600, 700 years ago, this technological era existed. We would talk about it the way people talk about Atlantis. Like they would be viewed as something of myth. And legend, like dragon glass and Valyrian steel and unobtainium and all the things that we have in sci-fi. They would be like, those things would exist, like, because they wouldn't giant machines that can move buckets. It's crazy. So fundamentally, though, it sounds like cooperating as opposed to like competition of some kind, because the markets demand it. Is that an incorrect? I mean, I wouldn't say that's a stretch. Markets demand some level of competition, but it sounds like planetarily, or at least in mass inside your ecosystem, cooperation is favorable to conflict.
Yeah, in fact, I don't see cooperation and competition as opposites at all. Ooh. Because in a market system, what are we competing to do is cooperate, right? If I cooperate with you better than my competitor cooperates with you, I'm competing with him in order to make your life better, right?
Gotcha. So what you're telling me is competing for love works.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Valid strategy. I mean, I guess that's what that effectively is what everyone's doing to some extent. We just swap it out for some other social currency, right? Buy whatever from my shop, or vote for me, or go on the date with me. Yeah. When you get social, it's from scales of the interpersonal relationships all the way up to the planet, really, because that's the way it's always been. So,
absolutely,
if that is true, then. Let's talk about what's happening right now, because right now we seem to have where conflict between trading partners is occurring. Why? What is the underlying, like, let's take the rhetoric out of it. What is the underlying vision? Like, is there not a vision, as near as you can tell? Like, what is happening on the ground now that's making us look at this outward world order? Specifically, we have tussles and trading agreements with between the United States and China, between the EU and China, between Russia and the EU. They just announced that they're going to make sure they're gas free. What are the reasons that we have here in the year 2025 for these kinds of conflicts that ultimately are not as productive as a cooperation would be?
Yeah, so there are. So in terms of the current administration, I think, as you put it, there is no vision. Or I should say not no vision, but maybe there's like half a dozen different visions, and nobody can decide which one is the one they want to pursue. So you can think of, maybe half a dozen different cases against free trade, of better and worse quality cases, and then all of these are mutually incompatible, but you can find somebody in the administration making one or the other of these cases. And so it's just a complete mess, and you have a completely incoherent strategy because nobody can decide what's the thing we're even trying to do.
Could you, would you mind devil's advocating some of those positions and then why, and explaining why they may be unfounded or where the hole might be in it, as if you were debating yourself?
Yeah, so we could probably start, most plausible to least plausible or ascending order, whichever.
Let's start in the realm of reality and go insane. Let's go that way.
Okay, yeah. So most plausible case against free trade, I think, is the war preparation. And so for non-economic reasons, we want to have some capacity for heavy industry onshore, just in case we end up going to war with a major trading partner. Mm. And that's going to be costly. It's going to lower our standard of living. It's going to, not be, it's going to be painful relative to trading. But if you're worried about vulnerability in a war, maybe that pain is worth it. I think that's the most plausible case against free trade in this particular moment.
I want you to keep a copy of the rules of acquisition next to me because I don't remember the number, but I know the text, and it's you can't make a deal if you're dead.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we can establish then that there are legitimate non-economic reasons to make an economic decision, and that's the most plausible one. Yeah. Would it be preferable to not be on a war footing with the rest of the planet? Like, would it be beneficial for the planet to just not, like, we will have more discussions about the political ways to make that happen, because believe me, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And we've had many conversations, and there'll be more about it on the political side. But is there another potential set of reasons, or are there other reasons that you can think of that are also legitimate but not necessarily the best economic move? Like, are there general moves that are considered you kind of have to make these because otherwise something goes horrible, in your view?
Yeah, and so the second most plausible defense of something like tariffs would be something like the goal is free trade. But sometimes countries will put tariffs, and so if we retaliate with tariffs, of course that hurts them and it hurts us. And so, compared to no tariffs, obviously this is bad, but sometimes it can be sensible to hurt yourself in order to hurt somebody else, in order to make them do something that helps both of you.
Or at the very least, helps you to an extent that is tolerable. But the reason why you're both going to do. So are you basically making the argument, is this similar to the argument of if you want to build your economy, you want to declare war against the United States and let them win? Is that effectively you bloody their nose, they blow you up, and then do a Warsaw type pact, which then reconstructs your entire thing?
Well, and then dissuades you from trying to do that again in the future, maybe, right, unless you're Germany.
Well,
yeah. So the thing about that, I mean, that seems like a plausible. Like, there are people in the administration saying that the goal of the tariffs is that we want to punish other countries for putting tariffs on us. Now, the problem with that is the actual tariffs that were announced on Liberation Day have absolutely nothing to do with any tariffs that are put on us. And the goal of this, deal-making sort of tariff would be, at the end of the day, free trade. And it's not clear that the goal of Liberation Day is to get rid of all tariffs, right?
Right.
Now, if that was, maybe you could see a case for it.
Could there be a potential case for it's basically sales tax by the back door? A national sales tax would be damaging politically, so we're going to make it an us versus them to rally people around.
This is actually one of the most interesting things about the interaction between politics and economics is there's a subfield of economics called tax incidence. Incidence in the sense of who actually pays a tax you assess. right? If you tax a corporation, do the shareholders pay it? Do the employees pay it? Does it get passed on to consumers? And what falls out of this is that there's a ranking of taxes in terms of how distortive they are, how damaging they are, how much they impede people's ability to satisfy their own goals for a given amount of revenue raised. And the goal of a tax, if it wants to impede the fewest plans, needs to be broad-based, as broad as possible, and you also want to tax things that are things that people will not necessarily respond to. And so what comes out as one of the best taxes in the sense of damaging the economy the least, people's ability to achieve their own goals.
Right.
The least damaging tax is actually a property tax.
Interesting. Jefferson has questions.
What's that?
Jefferson has questions.
But what's interesting is that that's actually one of the least politically popular taxes.
Yeah.
And now, on the other hand, tariffs are going to be one of the most damaging taxes just because it's, a high tax on a narrow base. What you really want is a low tax on a broad base. But because tariffs are a high tax on a narrow base, it's just so distortive, so damaging. And weirdly, that's the popular one, right? Because I think there's an intuition that people have that, I should be able to avoid a tax. Whereas the best taxes are actually ones you can't avoid.
Well, if you wish to maintain the standard of living, then, and the only way you can maintain this standard, because I can't even imagine a tariff possible that could maintain what we have now.
Right. And that would be one of the other justifications for tariffs is for revenue purposes, and that's just nuts.
Well, okay, for the record, Cosmopolitan Coalition of United Earth, their whole thing is about representation for everyone, everywhere, all the time. To that extent, the end goal here is if we can align our institutions, and we're going to get into that later. And I'm partially speaking to the audience here because I've been checked in a minute. The idea of tariffs are kind of nonsensical. I think I recently learned, thanks to the news, that there was internal trade barriers inside the country of Canada, and I thought that was nutty. And yet they persist. But ultimately, if we find that nutty, then ultimately, when you take the planet, I mean, it's just the same move. And these borders, and we shared a map, or I think I shared a map with you last night in preparation for this conversation, that the borders as we understand them, the things that we have started assigning national identities to are, for the most part, ultimately they are arbitrary, but more importantly, recent. And so it seems that for thousands of years, we have had what is effectively the free flow of people, movement, and goods throughout the planet, because borders were soft, right? Yeah, the Roman Empire is here, and this dynasty is to here, and the Mongols are over here. But if you're just a trader walking through the mountains or the desert, it's not really, until you get to sign postage, it's not really a border, right? Like if you put your ranch in what you put your ranch somewhere, you don't even know, which military claims this space until they show up one day and say, hey, guess what? It's tax time. So to that extent, it seems that this system itself, in the same respect, is kind of unnecessarily arbitrary, or maybe it was necessary, but it seems less necessary now. How do you view the current economic structure with the this trade war notwithstanding? Let's look at the general idea of the nation-state system to the WTO and the free trade as we have it. What are the limits? What's going on here that's making this friction happen? And are there any cases where we could alleviate some of this friction? through some sort of common structures or co-equal agreements or something.
Yeah. So I also want to emphasize that everything I've said so far is entirely compatible with nationalist sentiment. You could be the most nationalist person, you know, rah rah, guns and Jesus, American flag, whatever, and still believe in free trade, right? Or you could be, you know, a Pakistani nationalist or whatever nationalist, and the case for free trade still goes through. In a way that it doesn't necessarily for some other issues, because you're right, you know, historically speaking, borders were porous. However, there was high friction. And so it's a very different world where you can just hop on a plane and get anywhere in less than 24 hours, as opposed to where you have to hike with a caravan of camels, right? Now, that's been, I would say, unambiguously a good development in the case of trade, because it facilitates trade. To the extent it facilitates population movements, you know, I don't necessarily want to commit to that being good or bad. But the case for trade goes through regardless of whether you think that's good or bad.
So, well, you touch on the airplanes and the travel, and we did talk about, you know, this communication and how the privilege of it. But let's talk about the fact that it exists, because it seems like this is an integration that we just can't, we can't not. We are now on top of each other. There's very little idea of distance. What was once, you know, the trip it took to go from, you know, the inner coast to the coast, a couple hundred miles, was, you know, multiple days of travel. Maybe you pull it off in one if you're lucky enough to get like a wagon or something that you can carry your stuff on, but ultimately you're going to have to rest and get supplies as you travel just from one region of your same state or region to, you know, some other part of it. Whereas now that's like, what are you talking about? I'll be there in like 2 hours. But there's no world we go back to where unless there is a full-on, you know, energy collapse, there is no world we go back to where those kinds of travels happen again. So if that's the case, it seems to me that what we have now, the nationalist sentiment that exists now with that friction, as lower as it is, if we look at global conflicts generally, as we've been going, though military spending seems to be going up, in that, I apologize, I lost my train. As we continue to travel through this technological progress, I just see us being more on top of each other. So how can this nationalistic system even, despite the compatibility, how can it persist as is? It seems like the cost of doing business in a resource scarce environment is going up for the very instruments of war even. Like how do you pull that off? I want to have a trade war with everyone, but in order to make the advanced weaponry, I need to have the chips and the blah, 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 blah. But I don't literally have the raw materials unless I trade. So it's, what?
I think there's definitely something to be said for a capitalist peace hypothesis, which is that countries that trade more with each other are less likely to go to war with each other. And again, like you said, because of this kind of mutual interdependence. And I think that's a good thing.
So would we say that over time, then, that if that interdependence becomes commonplace, and if we can solidify that, then would the structures of war be modifiable into a sense where it becomes sort of a globe? The thing that always bothered me is we have concepts like the United States, and we have concepts like the European Union, and we have concepts like NATO, and we have concepts like the CSTO, I believe, the Warsaw equivalent. So we have these various economic layers, and then we have the military layers on top of them, which are really the extensions of statecraft. But as people have pointed out recently, we've started using, in the negotiations for one, we're also using the other. And if that's the case, it seems like something's trying to line up here.
Let's think about the role of the nation state in historical perspective.
Okay.
because I think nationalism gets kind of an unfairly bad rap because it sounds parochial, but actually nationalism was the anti-parochial position for much of history, right? Nationalism means that I am no longer loyal to my small group, my town, my ethnic group, my religious group. I am now loyal to I identify with the nation, which includes all of them. And that ability to scale up cooperation through civic nationalism, I think, was a big factor in increasing the size and scale of political blocs, such that you could have integrated markets within them, and then later on between them. Now, what you want to do is scale that up again and say, now I am no longer loyal to my nation, but maybe now I'm loyal to the world. And it's not clear to me that that is from the perspective of consonance with the way people actually conceive loyalty in a civic nationalist sense. It's not clear to me that loyalty to the world or to humanity is actually a scalable or generalizable moral phenomenon.
I fundamentally disagree. I agree that it is a rarer expression. I think a lot of that expression comes from the necessities to survive with what little resources we have, right? Like there are cases where, one pod or tribe or group, whatever your 150-ish, I think is how our hunter-gatherer and then our early agrarian societies were. There is an advantage to being like, you know what, we're just going to send some people over and kill them and take their stuff. Because otherwise some of us are going to starve and we don't want to starve, and maybe I like this thing. So we'll do unto others who look like, believe like, whatever, us, and everyone else is heathen, traitor, blah, 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 blah. There's a survival advantage to that. So I can definitely understand the mechanism for why that narrative needs to exist, right? And how the idea of I think it's the greedy game where it's like if two people decide to compete, then you end up slashing that generation, and you can sort of find that there are outcomes where if you never cooperate, your species goes extinct. If you always cooperate, your species gets taken advantage of and you go extinct from parasitic forces. And then, so there has to be some bubble. Totally get that. I think it can be scaled because I think at the end of the day, if we can recognize that that is a common feature, at least of the species, right? I can't, look, until such time as the Vulcans actually land, I'm not going to address that question. Like, I can't, like, when the robot itself comes up and says, I want to vote, then we will have that conversation. But right now, I think that as a human species, ultimately, we find that capacity does exist. Yeah, historically, we've only limited it to X, Y, Z, but it is still in a many different places. So I don't, in other words, I think there's reason to have faith.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but think about what's the point of humans being cooperative? Why are humans cooperative way more than any other related primate species? It's because we want to do two things. We want to defend ourselves against aggressive conspecifics, and we want to attack them and take their stuff. Now, you could say, that's bad, good, whatever. But the point of cooperation, and again, this is why I say cooperation and competition are not opposites, because again, we are cooperative in order to compete.
Oh, thank you for the new subscriber from TikTok. So we are cooperative in order to compete.
Mhm. And so if you're a global community, right, it seems like there's got to be something to focus that cooperative energy. Otherwise, what are we cooperating for?
Ah, so you're asking what's the point if we, that is, that's fascinating. I believe that's a value proposition.
Mhm.
Because I can make the argument that, hey, if we choose not to spend the $2.4 trillion per year and rising on defense, we can use that, personnel. Like, I understand that at the end of the day, as the Onion article says, the dollar doesn't mean it. Like, it's all fake, right? It's just a piece of paper, but it does represent individuals who can labor in a different way. Engineers, support personnel, the logistics are all still there, even if we're not using it for the war thing, right? I do believe there's a degree of flexibility and fungibility or fungibility of that resource if we choose to spend it elsewhere. And I would suspect that we would probably see, I mean, it is often talked about the European peacetime dividend as a result of the NATO. Like, one of the arguments that the US administration is currently making is, hey, people aren't paying their 2%. Where's their 2%? Because we're paying more than 2%. What's going on? But at the same time, we admit that there's that peacetime dividend in the tax base of the European Union, in part due to that. So if that's true, then that should be scalable planet-wide. So really, I guess the big bad, if there has to be a big bad and exclusionary, right? The big bad there is sort of the forces of entropy. The enemy is entropy. And ironically, we will create massive amounts of entropy in order to defeat entropy. And I think that is reason enough. I mean, I think if we could come up with some sort of proportional, again, fully representative system, political topic, actually off topic for today, ironically, then I think at the end of the day, we would be better off. Like, if NASA is inefficient because you have, different places in different states, and it would be better to cooperate together rather than have them compete to put the individual parts in the various areas, then we could deduplicate some of our space programs, or deduplicate some of our research programs, or deduplicate some of our infrastructure programs. Like, we do a lot of duplication on top of the fact that we're, preparing to defend ourselves from ourselves at all times while trading with ourselves to make the things we use to try and kill ourselves.
Well, I agree that given that assuming that everybody could magically stop fighting and exploiting their fellow man, that we would be way better off. But that's exactly the problem, is how do we prevent that, right? There's always some opportunity to exploit any social system. And so the problem of a social system is to deal with that kind of exploitation of this other, right? Now, the innovation of nationalism was to say that now the other, we're going to keep everybody inside in line, and we're going to homogenize you with some sort of sense of civic nationalism, so that we can redirect all that energy outward. Right? And then inside, right, we now cooperate a lot more. And so the question in practice is the fight against entropy, like, I could be inspired by that. I believe that you're inspired by that. I think a lot of people could. The question would be, is it enough to keep in line the potential for advantage taking and exploitation within the society? And if it's not, then there's always got to be that sort of other that energy is directed toward, that cooperative energy is directed toward.
Potential spoilers for anyone who watches Star Trek Strange New World, but I will ask you, have you seen it all? Because there's
I've
an
not seen Strange New Worlds.
Okay, so then I never mind. I won't make that analogy.
Sorry.
I recommend it, but that question is directly addressed in a very interesting way. But I will not talk about it. But ultimately, it sounds like the answer. It sounds like if there can't be an effigial scapegoat, there must be a real scapegoat. I like to think that, like you said yourself, you're potentially inspired by the entropy. So really, it's kind of like a flag in that way, right? Like there's no reason we have to have flags for countries. There's no reason they're mostly rectangles. It's just basically thanks to the various political, socioeconomic, and war, militaristic, colonial, or whatever pressures, everyone mostly has flags. So we just kind of accept that if you have a country, you have a flag. There's a joke about it. And some places had a person, right? That's where your heads of states are. It's just the person that is just the embodiment of the state. Sometimes it's hereditary. Most of the time these days it's elected, but ultimately person. Doesn't have to be. We choose there to be, right? Like, we understand that at some level, the amount of decisions that are being made are not by that one individual in the stately case. But yet we need them because we want our flag. We want our person. We want our identity, our color scheme. We want a match at the football stadium. And that is a very powerful force. So it sounds like there is a potential solution, which is come up with the Dr. Manhattan without doing, preferably, the Dr. Manhattan.
You mean like the Ozymandias?
Well, yeah. Well, wait. Are we in the universe where we know? Was that revealed? I don't know. If it can be done, I mean, if entropy is a thing, then really, almost like currency is as real as we believe it to be, then that common enemy is what we believe it to be. His current politics notwithstanding, I believe that was like the original hype behind Elon Musk when he was claiming to be like the Tony Stark of his thing. Is like, he's like, we need to become multiplanetary. Like, the reasoning he provided is, the problem is we're going to die if we stay here. We're going to die if we don't figure out a way to solve our long-term energy issues, right? Like how much oil we have left, how much coal we have left. Like eventually those are not those kinds of things. So his logic for whatever his implementations and whatever his politics, his logic at the time for investing in those companies or starting those companies, whichever one we're talking about, was kind of sound. Like, that's the battle against entropy. You don't want to be here when the rock slams into the planet, right? Yeah. You don't want to be like, it's not good. So I don't, and that seems to inspire many people for a time anyway.
Yeah, I think that's at least not impossible, right? But it does raise what I think is a major challenge for any kind of global governance system, is think about what are the most cooperative societies, organizations, whatever. Think about today, we think of Sweden or Japan as some of the most cooperative and high trust societies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, 800 years ago, what were the Swedes doing?
I don't know. Tell me what they were doing 800 years ago.
They were pillaging all throughout continental Europe. 100 years ago, what were the Japanese doing?
Pillaging in Eastern Asian continent.
Exactly, right? So what you have is something that is highly, highly regimented, cooperative internally in order to pursue a goal externally. And think of the military, right? A military has to be a super, super cooperative endeavor, because anybody who is not cooperating is going to get everybody killed. And so if you run away at your post, you will get killed. You will get executed. That's treason, right? And so the the larger the scale of cooperation,
Hmm.
the more cohesive you want it to be, the stricter you're going to have to be in terms of suppressing antisocial behavior internally.
Right. Um,
And that becomes harder as you scale up.
Absolutely, right. And that is, I think what we've seen here is that is a function less of who we are as individuals innately, like whatever our oh, I think, give me 1 second here. Sorry, for some reason. Boom. Sorry, I had to refresh. I'll stop on this point and then actually drop the stream for a minute because I'm going to try and get the Cosmo TikTok embedded with the rest so we can have one consistent thing. Well, this seems like a good time for break because we've been going for about 1 hour. But I think that limit of internal cooperation is a function, has been shown to be a function of the limits of technology, not necessarily something that's innate to humans. And I see this again in the fact, like, Rome got big because Rome did the Eisenhower interstate system. Wasn't called that, but basically that's what they did for the technology of the time, right? And as a result of that, they could move stuff far distances. America did that, and then boom, you know, there we are. But now the world has done it, right? This is something that's never happened on this planet before. And I think the fact that that exists, the fact that I can move for huge economic forces of benefit, as in responding to a disaster, right? But also huge assets of destruction within hours anywhere on the planet, if we're coordinated enough. That's that's not beyond technological physical control, right? That exists now. Right now, it seems the missing piece is the actual will to look at the various systems that may need to be altered, because at this point we're operating with stuff for the most part that we've inherited, and it doesn't matter what country you're in, doesn't matter what culture you have or religion or whatever. All of us alive today are basically operating with something that was built long before we existed, our grandparents existed, our great-great-grandparents existed. Like, nationalism itself is kind of getting that, but the reality is the current structure that we have is an evolved system as is, not a planned system or even a cooperative system generally, right?
Yeah.
So,
which suggests it might have features that a planned system would miss.
maybe, but it could also have features that are vestigial, right?
Also possible.
So in that sense, a refreshing of the fundamentals is at play. And the good news is the system that's evolved here partially has survived a planned refresh, because constitutional law, as we understand it globally, doesn't, I mean, yeah, the details differ, but as it extends globally, the moment you say you're going to take a break, tons of people show up into the chat. So now I'm going to leave you here. I'm sorry. That was just too timely. It was like one or two people, and all of a sudden, like, we're going to take a break in a minute, and it shoots up.
It's a vestigial.
The vestigial, yeah. We've created stuff that was necessary at the time, but may not necessarily be necessary in its current form as is now. But the just like that, was it the gang? I think it's a nerve in a giraffe's neck that you've shown, like, as you iterate over time, like, there's no reason for that nerve to travel like that loop. But if technically you could fix it with surgery, but nature's not going to give you a shorter shorter neck until at some point, unless you're going through slicing heads, and then you eventually
I
get one.
actually have seen a defense of that. I'm not enough of a biologist to tell you what the defense is, but somebody has said that's actually functional.
Well, it's a functional nerve, but does it have to be as long? Could you
Right.
make it
But
shorter?
it's functional for it to loop over in the way that people sometimes rag on it for being pointless.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is it's a bad point, perhaps in a biological
Again,
argument.
I'm relaying this secondhand, so you don't have to believe me because I don't remember the biological details.
People can leave
But such an
comments.
argument at least does exist out there.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I don't think it's the only example in nature.
Yeah.
But for once, I choose not to die on that hill. So thank you for joining, everyone. If you're on, I'm going to just mute here for a little bit for about, let's see, the time is now 8:40 p.m. Eastern. So it's at 20. So this should be the next day. We're now into Wednesday if you are in Universal Time Coordinated or after. We are currently streaming on YouTube, Twitch. Let me just check on here. YouTube, Twitch. We are streaming on Twitch. We are streaming on YouTube. But we are not streaming on Instagram because there was a separate button. Thanks, Instagram.
No.
Yeah, it's fine. They'll be all these will be cut. This live stream will be cut up into shorts and then pushed out. Right now, we're about 4 weeks out. So if you're watching this live and you missed some parts and you want to rewatch it in shorts form, you'll expect it sometime in July, August, somewhere in there. So yeah, we're going to take a break for about 5 minutes. I'm going to mute this side. I'm going to end the TikTok chat. I'm hoping that because we had this live, I can now switch you guys over to the main feed and we can put it together. So thank you on TikTok. If you want to get notifications, just go ahead and hit that subscribe. And for anyone else who is not going to be back after the break, please like, subscribe, follow. Our goal is to try and hit 100 in each one we're in. There's live stats. If you're on any of the other versions on YouTube, you'll see live stats on the feed. We're at 101 on TikTok, 41 on YouTube, 34 on LinkedIn, 18 on Discord. You sign up on our website if you want to do that. 13 on Instagram, 6 on Facebook, and then Twitch, Twitter, Reddit, and Blue Sky is currently at 1. So hopefully we can get those up. If we can get some of those numbers up to particular numbers, it unlocks more features to like go live on those platforms and stuff simultaneously, and that allows us to grow more. So going to take a break here. We should be back or I'll be back at least. I don't know what your timing is. We have a few topics left, but I kept you already longer than our previous one. What's your timing?
I can stick around for, I don't know, another half an hour.
Okay, so let's say we'll take 10, and then we'll be back at 8:52. Hopefully all set up.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and... All
Whenever you're ready.
right. So if you're on, and actually let me hit go live on Instagram. All right. So we are now adding Instagram. Instagram actually wasn't on the first section. So that's now live. YouTube is still on, and Twitch is still on. TikTok, I'm going to turn on now. Unfortunately, it did not go, so I'm just going to start part 2. And I doubt it'll make me re-verify. It'll just have me go live again. Live. And it kept the same stuff. And perfect. I think we are good. All right. All right. So, hi again, TikTok. Unfortunately, it still won't let me integrate it. So I guess we'll just have to get this, the number of followers up and go from there. But we are back for the second part, and we got the camera working, hopefully. So you should be seeing, if you're not on TikTok, but you're on YouTube, Twitch, or now Instagram, you can actually see the visual of Professor Harwick. You should be, if you're on TikTok, hear him when he talks in my ears, because that should be picking up by my headset. If you'd like to join the conversation in Discord, we do have that. In fact, actually, let's check here to see if we have any comments over there. We did check TikTok earlier, we did see some highs, so hi. Let's see. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments and we will try and answer them. We have about 30 minutes left here with Professor Harwick. And let me just check the comments here. We are good. All right. So we kind of meandered around as I think President Trump said, he goes in one direction and goes all the way around and then ends up somewhere else. Maybe that's part of the problem. Who knows? But let's try and focus on some pointed topics. So we talked about free trade earlier. We talked about the benefit to our society generally and the technological advancements that have been the cause of that advancement or have been the result of those advancements. Existing political structures, the tension there. Ultimately, we have some conflicts that are currently taking place now. We'll focus on Ukraine here for a moment. So there's the reasoning provided earlier for the tariffs, which was if you want to go to a war footing. However, we have lots of stuff that's way more expensive than it used to be. Is it fundamentally cost effective or not for a wartime footing, a la Russia's invasion of Ukraine or any of the myriad of territorial conflicts happening right now?
Sorry, were you asking me that question or were you still introducing?
Oh, no, I'm asking you that question. The question is, well, let me expand that there. The question is based on the cost of war generally, right? Not necessarily the cost to build the $1 million missile, but the overall, even if the missile is successful, you've not only spent the $1 million on the missile, but you've also blown something up that is probably worth more than $1 million.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas in the past, you would fire your catapult or your cannon, you might take out the castle wall relative to, you know, taking miles and miles of farmland, not the same thing.
Yeah, war is costly. And of course, we'd be better off if there were no need for war. Now, that being said, I don't think that it is valid to jump from that to a pacifist position, because it could be the case that, and this goes back to what we were talking about before the stream, there are always going to be actors within or outside of a society who try to take advantage. And there has to be a response to that, even at your own expense. And if that entails war, then better to fight back than to be steamrolled.
Hmm.
Right? So, do I think the war was a good idea from Russia's perspective? They certainly have not been as successful as they hoped to be.
Mhm.
But you can imagine a world where this would have been a very profitable thing for Russia. They clearly thought that they had good reasons to do it. We did not, we being NATO, did not successfully deter them from doing this. And now we're stuck in this big, long slog that, of course, it would be better for everybody if we weren't in the slog. But now that we are, the question before us now is, do we want to reward the sort of behavior that is, I think we would both agree, inimical to international peace?
Mm.
And Zelensky has made this point too, right? The peaceful thing to do is not to stop fighting. The peaceful thing to do is to make sure that it's not worth it for future aggressors to aggress.
If it's not fundamentally cost effective at this stage, the moment it became not cost effective for Russia to persist, why, then the question is, why does it persist? Like, what is the rational actor there? If ultimately I've heard the argument, well, they just want this area because it has oil reserves, or they want this area because this is where the breadbasket is, right? So therefore they need the farmland for expansion, which I don't understand because Russia's already ridiculously giant. But okay, like accepting that's for what it is. But at this point, after so many years, it's just a lot of the infrastructure was there is basically rubble in the disputed region. On top of the fact, and it unlike a war of colonial pursuit where your target is very, very far away, because they're next door, they're hitting you too. And so at some point, like, the math doesn't math, but then the question is, why are we continuing to do the bad math? Is it an irrational actor? Is it a different non-economic reason? Does Russia genuinely feel like NATO would invade and take Moscow?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning with preference aggregation, right? There's no will of the Russian people. What there is a political process that turns input or lack of input into actual political decisions. And what I would guess is the case is that this is very rational for the political leaders in Russia, even at the expense of the Russian people. And that is such a common situation in political systems, is that the incentives of the people in political power do not align with the wants and needs, the preferences of the people who they are over. This is, I would say, the fundamental thing keeping poor countries poor, is the lack of alignment of the incentives of political leaders, which leads them to do things like invade another country that are not necessarily in the interest of the country, but it is in the interest of the leader.
Well, I try to stay on the economic topic list that we made for but my response, if the ultimate problem, as you describe, right, I accept it. I completely agree with you. 100%. The issue on the table is the thing that the will is the economic and political inputs that's resulting in those outputs, which is expressing in the consequences of I'm fighting over rubble for some reason, rather than just trading and swapping my natural gas for those dollars right there. The fact that exists is a function of the fact that the selectors, the ultimate interest of the individuals involved on the ground, is not reflected, as near as I can tell, and I'd have to look at the specifics for the legislature of the Russian Federation, but it seems that the selection mechanisms are not as free and fair as they could be in some theoretical maximization of the quantization of interests, a la, do you have direct and fully proportional representation with a sufficient number of representatives to express some sort of rainbow interests of that area and keep that in alignment, right? Not even talking about specific policies. We're not talking about the things that come after, which is what should be socialized, what should remain competitive or whatever. What's your common good theory? You know, that's all secondary to the Russia itself. And by the way, this goes for every country. I am not picking on them specifically. We can go to charts where we look at how far people, nations are and states are and regions are and whatever your label is for your polygon on the map. We can see how far removed they are from a political decision-making process where there is effectively a representation for everyone everywhere all the time, in that their interests are as reflected in the outcomes of their electoral processes, right? Like, if that, I would, the problem that we run into is, yeah, again, this inherited system doesn't actually have those representative ideas being reflected, which is not going to be the outcome of the economic decision. It's almost a scale up of I'm going to tell a story. I think I can explain this better with a story. The question of who is to blame comes up a lot in the conversations that I had with people when I've been talking about this framework. The ultimate issue economically is, if we are spending our dollar or choosing where to seek work to earn our dollar, or where we're investing our dollar, ultimately that is a vote of a kind. So I have, I'm lucky enough that I work for an employer that has a 401k plan on top of some other stuff, but a 401k plan, which is in the United States, it's, for those who are unaware, it is basically like a mutual index investment fund. And they have all sort of brokerage firms and people who manage those kinds of things. And basically, those brokerage firms are being tasked with make line go up. Your job as the money person for me is to make sure that when I reach 70, 80, whatever, and I retire, that nest egg is there. But that also means that that board that is going to be selected, right? Because that brokerage firm is going to take all those financial instruments under their control, right? That they've invested with. And they are going to cast the votes for the boards of the various companies that are part of these investment funds. And they're going to only hire / vote for those representatives that will make that line go up. Why? Because if they didn't do that, then the people who put the money with the brokerage firm in the first place are going to be like, what the heck? Why aren't you making the optimal decision for me? You're fired. And then they're going to go find the other one. So that's why don't the CEOs make the bold decisions to do the community good thing as opposed to the maximizing of the profit for the shareholders thing? It's because if they didn't, they would get fired and replaced by the end of the day by someone who does. And since there's 8 billion people on Earth, you will eventually find someone. So at the end of the day, who is responsible for the decisions of that? At the end of the day, it's me. I'm responsible because I decided to abdicate my active decision-making in my stock, right? I just handed my stock to a broker and I said, you go make the line go up, and he did exactly as he was told, and the rest is the consequence of that outcome, which I think dovetails nicely into what we started with at the beginning, which is your will is the actual reflection of your decisions, not necessarily the desire unto itself.
Right.
So at a national level, the same thing is happening here, right? Because I am separating myself from the lawmaking decision. At some point, that representative if they are even vying, actually trying to keep the vote, they would execute the actions as they feel within their percentages. So if your system isn't actually representative of your outcomes, then ultimately your will is going into a chaos machine. that's leading to a random outcome. And boy, if there was any definition of the current state of the geopolitical and socioeconomic state of the world right now, it's a chaotic outcome. So in that respect, I mean, would you find these linked together, that your economic decision making is ultimately far removed from us at some larger level, that's causing some issues?
I think that's the right parallel to draw. I wouldn't necessarily draw the same conclusions, but definitely in terms of inputs and a decision-making process that results in an output. And thinking of both of them that way is the right way to think about this. Going back to the first thing we talked about in terms of line go up, I'm again going to defend that, make line go up is actually the most pro-social thing that CEO could do. Because what is the stock market? The stock market is capitalized values of future profitability. And the more a system can funnel resources toward ventures with the most potential for satisfying wants and needs, making line go up, which means facilitating you and me in our own goals, right? That's more economic growth, that's more stock growth, and that's good for the person investing. And I don't think that, again, that's not a critique. If you think there are other goals that should be pursued, that's not a critique of line go up. What that is a critique of how we measure the line.
Mm-hmm. Kelvin. No. Yeah. So that what you're effectively saying, it's not the fact that the temperature, it's not the issue isn't the temperature going up. It's the fact that they're measuring in Celsius or Fahrenheit when they should be measuring in Kelvin, or maybe you don't know the correct measure, and that's the problem.
Yeah, or you could say, the thermometer says it's so cold outside, and yet I'm still sweating. Well, the thermometer doesn't reflect the fact that you might have a fever, right? And so what you want is not an objective temperature measure. Maybe you want something that accounts for the fact that you have a fever to give you something like subjective temperature.
Mm.
And like most of the time, air temperature and subjective temperature are going to be pretty closely linked. Not all the time, but if what I care about is subjective temperature, then complaining about the thermometer is not, it's missing the point.
I like that analogy. Complaining about the thermometer is missing the point. But there is, okay, yeah, I can buy that, because then that doesn't conflict with the goals of what's attempting to be achieved. So
yeah,
the skepticism of the attempt to make entropy the big bad, as it were, is noted, and I understand it. And until we can prove it, I mean, it's like, can you put a nuclear powered SUV on Mars? Sure, but you can't until you do. So yeah, I can see that. We have about 9 minutes, and I just want to. I think we actually did go through the rest. Is there anything that you would in the close? Is there anything you would like? There's something that was like a push of hope or an aspiration to get through this. Like, is there anything that you can leave us with where you can like, okay, we can get through this, or we can do this together, kind of thing? Is there something that you see as a good on the horizon, positive outcome about the world right now? In the economic global trade perspective.
You're talking about in terms of not the far future Cosmopolitan Coalition, but like getting through the next year.
I would say the next 5 to 10. Yeah, middle ground. I would say the Cosmopolitan Coalition endeavors to make some serious strides in the next quarter century. April the 5th, 2063, that's the deadline.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there, the next 5 to 10 years, like what can I think about the life for my children? They're early adults. I have an 18 and 19-year-old now, and I have one who is about to be 16. So the future is theirs. And so what should I expect for them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of solid fundamentals. I also think there's a lot of course, dangers. And I can't say which way it's going to go. But if we're focusing on the solid fundamentals, the U.S. is still a relatively well-governed country by world standards. We have. Oh, yeah. Okay. I should ask. Do you want me to talk from the world perspective or from the U.S. perspective?
And that's a fair point. And actually, I realized we didn't actually do the disclaimer earlier. All topics of discussion and all individual points made are about us as individuals. They are not indicative of any institutions we are a part of or associated with. We do not speak for anything that is around. This is the most nonpartisan partisan that could ever neutral of the history of neutral. Because my follow-up question to you was going to be, because you were talking from the U.S. perspective, and please continue to do so. I would like to expand that at least to the West from your perspective, because I think that the Western perspective generally is within that. But my follow-up question to you after that is, can we see a potential for a long-term cooperative peace, even with different economic blocks, such as the rising BRICS standard and that kind of stuff? So.
Yeah, and from a global perspective, as you pointed out, we're still in a position where innovation is happening. That is still historically anomalous, and there are reasons I'm concerned for the future of innovation, but it's still happening, and it's happening at still a massive clip. If you look at the development of LLMs, I mean, the way we use information today is so different than it was even like 3 years ago. And the possibilities are just enormous. We haven't even begun to tap the potential of some of these new tools we developed in just the past few years. I think the possibilities of relieving poverty globally, there's been enormous strides in that in just the past few decades. And who can say what the future holds, but at least in the next 5 or 10 years, I don't see any reason why that has to slow down. And so I think even if we are near the peak, right, even if things are, we're approaching the end of the roller coaster and looking down, right, we're still at the peak. This is like the peak of human history. And I think as much as we are focused on the danger, it would be remiss to forget that we are basically at the peak of human history.
If you could go back in time, where would you want to go? Now. Now.
Yeah.
Don't you want to go back to yeah, exactly. Well, I appreciate, I thank you for that. And for all those who want to try and bring that future forward, go to cosmopolitancoalition.org/engage. If you'd be interested in joining the Cosmopolitan community, we'd love to have conversations. This is our first conversation live stream, so we'd love to get some feedback. It's imperfect, it's a mess, but so is humanity. So we'll go from there and go better for the next time. Thank you so much, Professor Harwick, for joining us. Hope to have you back. There are plenty of other topics that I'd love to pick your brain about and argue over. But we will, next week, we will have the planning meeting. So we'll just be doing the update where we are, all the stuff that's been created, some of it thanks to AI. A lot of this setup, I would not have been able to do with some AI assistance. So next week, May 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern time, is I believe so, it's on the website, the next planning meeting, and then that's a monthly recurring one, and then look out for an announcement for the next conversation. Thank you so much. My name is JD with the Cosmopolitan Coalition of United Earth. Again, this is Professor Cameron Harwick, and have a good